Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. It was nice to be back at Westminster after a month of being unemployed, if not claiming benefit. It was a surprise victory, although I did give the Prime Minister a memo about a year ago that said, I reckon you'll be somewhere between 15 seats short and 15 seats over a majority. And I couldn't see anything that was going to change the fundamentals, the fact that the electorate do not throw out competent governments and have not done so really since the war. But after the euphoria and the great personal victory for David Cameron comes the reality all very quickly, all over again. And we have the really big issues coming crashing back onto the in-tray very quickly. And they will be money, Europe, and security, at least two of the three, which were almost not talked about at all during the general election. And many of these external events will be the ones that will be shaping our politics in the time ahead. One of the immediate challenges, of course, is the spending round. Now, I don't know really about you, but I do not regard an 87 billion borrowing requirement as being compatible with my definition of austerity. And the great lie of this election was that perpetrated by the left, that you could choose an anti-austerity agenda. And part of the problem lies in our language, because we shouldn't call it austerity, we should call it what it is, which is living within your means. And because if you turn it around the other way, it's very hard to say, I demand a living out with your own means agenda for the left-wing parties. We need to get our language right in this debate if we're to actually win the politics. Now, there are two elements to the economic challenge as far as I see it. Where do we get the money from for the additional spending commitments, and how do we get our finances into proper balance so that we can avoid an ever-increasing budgetary problem of our debt interest? And when you look at our current projections of debt interest, by 2018-19, we'll be spending much more on debt interest than we're spending on defense or indeed education. And a country that's spending more money servicing its debt than educating its children has got something wrong in its financial balances. And the question then follows, which bits of the state do we shrink? If we actually believe in having a smaller state, which bits of the state do we shrink? Because that will determine what sort of country we actually are. For example, I do not believe that Conservatives shrink the security state to protect the social security state. And that is one of the big challenges that we will be having in the times ahead. And on top of that, we have the real, what I regard as the real economic threat to us, which is the threat to global financial stability that is represented by the lie of the euro. And the single currency still provides one of the single greatest risks that we face. And it was unstable from the very beginning. The wrong countries were allowed to join. Having been allowed to join, they then followed fiscal policies which took them further away from the point of convergence, and it added further instability to an already creaking architecture. And the biggest task for European leaders is to actually de-risk the euro. And they can do it in a number of ways. They can either go back to national currencies, which of course they won't do because that's against the whole project of ever closer union. They could get rid of the countries that are the biggest outliers in the project, and that would begin with Greece, but it would include Portugal and Spain and probably Italy, probably France, not that they'd want to hear that. Or they could get rid of the biggest outlier in the project, which is actually Germany. But Germany wouldn't like that because then they wouldn't get to use a phenomenally undervalued currency for the state of their economy. And then, if you're not going to do any of the above, then your fourth option is to move within the Eurozone, at least in part, if not in whole, to full political, economic and monetary union. And I made this point to someone in the Commission not long ago, and they said, your analysis is absolutely correct. It's got to be one of the four options, and they will take none of them. What they mean is it's an economic pass the parcel, which is a time bomb which they hope will go off when someone else is holding it. And European leaders need to deal with this because it's not only a threat to the European economy now, it's a threat to the global economy. And they need to be told that this is their most urgent task. Forget all the other nonsenses that we go through at European Council meetings and deal with this phenomenal risk which you are running on all our behalf. So that needs to be done. Now, the next thing that comes with that is the renegotiation on Britain's relationship with Europe. And all Eurosceptics of whatever nature should welcome a renegotiation. Because, do you know what? In any referendum, the British public might decide to stay in. And it would be much better to stay in under renegotiated conditions, whatever they are, than the status quo that we have today. Because for me, the ultimate horror are those three words, ever closer union. Because the logical end point of ever closer union is union. And when you heard Barroso today saying of David Cameron welcoming his election victory and welcoming the fact he wanted a new relationship and a renegotiation with Europe, and he said, and I quote, as long as it's compatible with the overall project of European integration. In other words, you can have a renegotiation, in his book, as long as it's not really a renegotiation. And that is the problem that we will face because the Eurocrats live on another planet. It is a parallel universe. I did an event with Mario Monti in Bruges last year, and he was speaking before me, and he said, we have done so well with the creation of the euro. The people of Europe should thank us in how we have created such a strong currency, a currency that they never thought we would be able to do. I said, excuse me, but are not 58% of young Spaniards out of work? How many young Europeans will be sacrificed on the altar of the single currency before you allow economic reality to come back in? I described it then as an economic European horror version of the Emperor's New Clothes. And no one has yet been willing to stand up inside the Eurocracy and say, it's not working, it won't work, it can never work. And that is a real problem that we face. Just to, if you don't think it's truly a parallel universe, the speaker after me said, what I would really like in Europe is for us to have reached a point where we can have a single European history book with a single view of European history. That is what the reality is of the sort of people that you might be negotiating with, to which I replied, not to the greatest popularity in the room, that one of the differences between Britain and the rest of our European partners, we were probably the only country in Europe that didn't feel the need to bury its 20th century history in a pan-European project. And then left for the station. Yeah. But the other very big issue, which played very little part in the election, but will play a very large part in the post-election, is international security. And this is a very perilous time for us. When we did the defence review back in 2010, we conducted that defence review in a number of columns. We looked at the proposals, we looked at the costings of proposals, we looked at operational implications, we looked at capability implications, we looked at regeneration, and our final column was real-world risk. What is the real-world risk that a program or a proposal is protecting us from? My view was, if you can't tell me the risk, we're not paying for the program. But on that final column, on every conceivable real-world risk, it has gone up. The arrow is pointing upwards from when it was in 2010, whether it's ISIS, transnational terrorism, or what I regard as the greatest potential threat at the moment, the expansionist and aggressive Russia under Putin. And we are now following our serial appeasement of Russia. He had a cyber attack on Estonia. We did nothing. He cut off Ukraine's oil against treaty. We did nothing. He invaded Georgia, where he still is today, incidentally, and we did almost nothing. And when I was in the MOD, the Foreign Office wouldn't even let us call it an occupation in Georgia. And in my view, if someone's got foreign troops on your soil in bases that you didn't allow them to have and they refuse to leave, that's what I call an occupation. And we've seen with Ukraine the forcible redrawing of the borders in Europe for the first time since World War II. We thought we had put that behind us. And I tell you now, we are only one miscalculation away by Putin of an Article 5 conflict on the European continent, the sort of risk we thought we had put behind us with the fall of the Berlin Wall. There is a very, very dangerous world out there. And when we debate what we should be doing in terms of defense spending, we need to look not at an arbitrary figure, we need to look at what the risks actually are out there. And when we are looking at what Putin has done in terms of upgrading his nuclear missile defenses, and upgrading his submarine fleet, upgrading his nuclear deterrent himself, we need to understand what we are up against, and we need to open our eyes to the threats that are out there. And when we talk about our 2% commitment to NATO, that is not just an internal debate that we're having. You think that they're not listening to that debate in the Kremlin? And when we say we'd rather protect our aid budget than protect our defense budget, that sends a very clear signal to the Kremlin and to any of those who would wish us harm. So we need to be very clear about the messages we are sending, because those messages will change the perception of risk that exists out there. And the final thing I want to say is this, that we have a great opportunity with a majority Conservative government at this particular era. We're at the beginning of the real era now of globalization. And as I often said, if Francis Fukuyama had called his book The End of Geography rather than The End of History, he'd have been a lot closer to the mark, because we live in a very shrinking world. But this world brings big risks and great opportunities. And what I would like to see from this Conservative government, and to paraphrase Tony Blair, we were elected as Conservatives, we have to govern as Conservatives, not a continuation of the coalition. But what we must do now is to talk the language of values. We need to make it very clear to these emerging economies and democracies that we are who we are because of conscious choices that we made, because of the values that we represent, because of the path that our forebears chose for us. Democracy, religious tolerance, equal rights for women are the fundamental prerequisites. They're the pillars upon which you can build a democracy. You cannot simply create Jeffersonian democracies in 10 years in parts of the world where there is no tradition. We need to use our influence and our values to create those pillars upon which a democratic system can ultimately be made, and made sustainably. And I think that the one thing that we should understand as a party, the Conservative Party, is that politics is binary. You either shape the world around you, or you'll be shaped by the world around you. And I believe that what the Conservative Party stands for at its best is the best in our history of our traditions, our conventions, our values, our philosophy, our ideology, our history. And this is a time to start to apply our values wherever we can in the world around us, so that those who do not benefit from the things that we take for granted can do so, and in the process making the world safer and better for ourselves in the meantime. That is a great challenge. We've got a lot of risks in the times ahead, but I believe that the Conservative Party is truly the repository of what is best in our country, if we simply have the faith in ourselves, our country, and what our people can achieve if we take the dead hand of the state off their shoulder. Thank you.